One of the little things I love in The Lord of the Rings is something I really used to hate. And it's hard for me to say I hate anything in the trilogy, but this particular moment used to always make my skin crawl, and not in a good way, if indeed there is a good way for skin to crawl. It takes place in the Fellowship of the Ring, at the beginning of the chapter, A Journey in the Dark. The Fellowship, or Company as they are generally called, has been defeated by Mount Caradhras and cannot get across the Misty Mountains. They have the option of either forging on south toward the Gap of Rohan, or returning to Rivendell. Neither have their pluses, as going south gets them closer and closer to Saruman, who has been revealed to be something of a problem. And going back to Rivendell would basically be an admission of defeat, since they could never leave there safely once they were back, and the ring would be stuck there. But there is a third option, and that is going through the ancient dwarf kingdom of Khazad-dûm, or Moria, the Black Pit as it was renamed thanks to all the evil things that have gone on there in recent centuries. It would appear that that decision is being made for them, as we read. Suddenly, Aragorn leapt to his feet. "How the wind howls!" he cried. "It is howling with wolf voices. The wargs have come west of the mountains." "Need we wait until morning, then?" said Gandalf. "It is as I said. The hunt is up. Even if we live to see the dawn, who now will wish to journey south by night with the wild wolves on his trail?" "How far is Moria?" asked Boromir. "There was a door southwest of Caradhras, some 15 miles as the crow flies, and maybe 20 as the wolf runs," answered Gandalf grimly. "Then let us start as soon as it is light tomorrow, if we can," said Boromir. "The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears." "True," said Aragorn, loosening his sword in its sheath. "But where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls." And it's that little exchange of, let's call them adages, that sticks out for me. The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. But where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls. And what has always bugged me about them is that they are delivered as if they really are adages, or old sayings, old saws, aphorisms, axioms, chestnuts, whatever you want to call them. But to my ear, they just don't have the right feeling behind them. Despite what Hammond and Skull say in their Reader's Companion to The Lord of the Rings, which is, this seems precisely the sort of proverb one would expect in Middle-earth. They are correct in that, I suppose, but also not. Again, as far as my ear goes. First of all, they seem to be being said with the gravitas that a true old saying ought to have. And yet, it seems pretty clear that Boromir is making his up on the spot. It is pretty well understood that orcs and wargs have a relationship and will work together at times. Certainly those of us who have read The Hobbit would know that. In that book, we have this. The wild wargs, for so the evil wolves over the edge of the wild were named, and the goblins often helped one another in wicked deeds. In those days, they, the goblins or orcs, sometimes used to go on raids, especially to get food or slaves to work for them. Then they often got the wargs to help and shared the plunder with them. Sometimes they rode on wolves like men do on horses. Despite that, one wonders how often this phenomenon has happened in Boromir's life. He has surely dealt with orcs in his fighting in Osgiliath and along the borders. But were there wargs running around in those encounters too? Possibly, but Boromir feels more of a frontline fighter, rather than stalking through the woods on missions like he happens to be on right now with the company. Woods where, I would say, howling wargs and prowling orcs are a bit more common. And so Boromir, it seems, is trying to make his point that they need to move on to Moria, and quickly, in the form of an old saying, because he's trying to obscure the fact that he doesn't have the true experience himself, which is evidenced in what he says as much as how. Because his comment disregards the fact that the two, orcs and wargs, do often work together. Aragorn's response corrects him in this, and rightly too. He has spent quite a bit of time in the wild. As he tells Pippin earlier, it would take more than a few days, or weeks, or years of wandering in the wild to make you look like Strider. And so he seems more likely to have had the experience of orc-warg pairings. As a result, he has the knowledge to produce an accurate comment about them. But even there, has such a thing happened so much and with such regularity over the centuries that an old saying would have been produced about the phenomenon, which Aragorn can trot out at this, the perfect occasion for it? It seems more like he is making up his on the spot, just like Boromir. That Aragorn responds to Boromir at all seems appropriate. They have to get a correct assessment of the situation in order to make the right decision. But that Aragorn does it in the form of his own adage, or adage wannabe, appears to be only as a reaction to Boromir doing the same. The both of them adding in the rhymes, it would seem, to make their respective comments appear more time-honored and age-old. More about the rhyming in a moment. Again, Aragorn's response, which uses the proper terminology, warg versus wolf, that is, feels more like correction rather than actual old saying deployment. Because it's important to remember their ages here. Boromir is 41, while Aragorn is more than twice that, at 87. And for comparison's sake, Boromir's father, Denethor, is 89. So Aragorn is bringing out, in essence, 2 lifetimes worth of experience compared to Boromir, and sharing what he knows the same way an older, wiser individual normally would. Of course, why doesn't he just say something more along the lines of, "Hey, don't kid yourself, Boromir. Orcs and wargs go together like hobbits and second breakfast." I suppose it could be deemed a little bit of one-upmanship between the two of them, both jockeying for position as leader of the company and eventually of Gondor itself. But while I can see Boromir going that route, I tend to think better of Aragorn. In fact, I think Aragorn is savvy enough to know what Boromir is up to, offering that limited knowledge which Boromir has in the form of an old saying because, again, he is trying to hide the fact that he does have limited knowledge. And so Aragorn is offering up his own false adage as counterpoint because it is the one that is more accurate to that situation, and is the one which ought to be listened to. That it comes out as an adage makes that point doubly clear. History has created this comment for a reason, so you better listen to it. Which is maybe why this exchange, this false imparting of ancient lore passed down through the ages, has always rankled me. Because it's so phony. The sayings simply do not have the power of a legacy behind them. The speakers want them to have it, but for reasons unique to each, they know that they do not. In fact, Gandalf's comment of, "Who now will wish to journey south by night with the wild wolves on his trail?" feels more like an old saw than what either Boromir or Aragorn say. The second thing that sticks out for me about these proverbs one would expect in Middle-earth is the rhyming itself. Rhyme is often used as a memory tool, so when it comes to adages and old sayings, just to be sure you remember them through the ages, we'll make them rhyme, which is fine. Yet here, the rhymes feel forced to me, and also just a little bit clunky to my ear. It's all too short and clipped as delivered. The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. But where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls. It's as if these sentences don't allow themselves to breathe and are more eager to end up in a rhyme just for the sake of it, rather than flow naturally to that state because, as I said before, that rhyming element seems to lend the sayings a power which the sayings themselves don't actually have. Ultimately, when it comes to these sayings as said by their sayers, I would say that we have heard much better adages so far. And we have heard a lot of them by this point in the book, even if they don't announce themselves as such. And we will continue to do so as the book goes on. One of the more famous would be Gildor saying to Frodo, "Do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. And then Frodo's response, go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both no and yes. Both of these are prefaced by it is said in the text, which of course gives them the air of ancientry. But Gildor's retort to Frodo's retort, advice is a dangerous gift, even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill, does not have that preface. It actually has the feeling of being made up on the spot. And yet, it still has the feeling of it is said behind it. Much more, I would say, than what Boromir and Aragorn say. The Hobbits have many old sayings. The Hobbit, the book, tells us that they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard, or have forgotten long ago. And in The Hobbit, we get a couple of good ones. Third time pays for all, which Bilbo informs us his father used to say. And one which the text tells us became a favorite saying of Bilbo's later, and passed into a proverb, and with good reason. Never laugh at live dragons. As far as proverbs or adages in The Lord of the Rings goes, Pippin begins well early on with, shortcuts make long delays. Frodo's remark back to Pippin after he says that, of shortcuts make delays, but inns make longer ones, has the feeling of a saying that has not yet become an old saying, but could easily become one. Sam's father, the gaffer, has an awful lot of old saws, some of which he delivers himself. It's an ill wind as blows nobody no good. All's well as ends better. And some of which Sam has the honor of sharing when most appropriate. Where there's life, there's hope, and need of victuals. It's the job that's never started as takes longest to finish. Sam even tries his own when he's at Hennethanoon. If you're short of sleep, cold water on the neck's like rain on wilted lettuce. All of these, even Sam's one about the wilted lettuce, have a weight to them, and a history, as if they have indeed been crafted by experience, and are accurate too, and so continue to be said the way any old saying should. As do the ones in the exchange we got between Elrond and Gimli before the company left Rivendell, which I would say is a nice comparison to the Boromir-Aragorn moment. What I'm talking about is this. Faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens, said Gimli. Maybe, said Elrond, but let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall. Yet sworn word may strengthen quaking heart. And while these, I would say, do have a gravitas behind them, a history of experience revealed, they also feel like they are coming out of their respective speakers as they are thought of in the moment. That is, Elrond and Gimli are indeed making these sayings up on the spot. But they are doing so not as old saying wannabes, but just as expressions which happen to be true. They could become old sayings if an occasion warrants that they be so, but neither seems concerned about that fact. They are just saying what they are saying. Neither seems to be trying to one-up the other with their cleverness, just making some key points in a clear and incisive way. The speakers, therefore, are only wishing to impart their thoughts, which just happen to have a universal application. That these words read so well, one might say in a poetic way, I think is a testament to these speakers themselves. Elrond, of course, has millennia of experience behind him. And while Gimli has quite a bit less years under his belt, being 139 at the time of the story, he is also unique in that he has, I would say, as much of a poet's heart inside him as he does a warrior's. This is best evidenced after the Battle of Helm's Deep, where he goes on into great detail about the glittering caves of Aglarond. There are columns of white and saffron and dawn rose, Legolas, fluted and twisted into dreamlike forms. They spring up from many-colored floors to meet the glistening pendants of the roof. Happy was the chance that drove me there. It makes me weep to leave them. No dwarf could be unmoved by such loveliness. To which Legolas responds, You move me. I have never heard you speak like this before. Legolas must not have been paying attention back in Lothlorien when Galadriel asked Gimli what gift he would like. "There is nothing, Lady Galadriel," said Gimli, bowing low and stammering. "Nothing, unless it is permitted to ask, nay, to name a single strand of your hair, which surpasses the gold of the earth, as the stars surpass the gems of the mine. I do not ask for such a gift, but you commanded me to name my desire." The lady smiled. "It is said that the skill of the dwarves is in their hands rather than in their tongues," she said. "Yet that is not true of Gimli." Legolas must have been too busy admiring his gift of bow strung with elf hair and quiver of arrows to have heard that. Either way, this is the same dwarf who can speak equally well as a warrior, declaring before Helm's Deep, "It is orc necks I would hew, not shave the scalps of men." And then after, "42, Master Legolas," he cried. "Alas, my axe is notched. The 42nd had an iron collar on his neck." Which brings us back to Boromir and Aragorn, who are warriors themselves, and inspirational, and dynamic, and authoritative, and leaders of men. But are they poets? Boromir I tend not to think of him as. Aragorn, on the other hand, given his experience with the elves and elsewhere, has the better shot at being considered so, and he certainly achieves it at the death of Boromir. Very definitely making it up on the spot, he sings, "Through Rohan, over fen and field, where the long grass grows, the west wind comes walking, and about the wall it goes. O Boromir, the tower of guard shall ever northward gaze to Rauros, golden Rauros falls, until the end of days." Is this inspiration in the moment, or has he always been able to do so? Hard to say. If anything, his rhyme about the wargs and orcs works a little better than Boromir's. And of course, Aragorn does share some decent adages throughout. One who cannot cast away a treasure at need is in fetters. The tree grows best in the land of its sires. Others do as well. Gandalf certainly gets his share. The burned hand teaches best. For he that strikes the first blow, if he strikes it hard enough, may need to strike no more. When the plot is ripe, it remains no longer secret. Generous deed should not be checked by cold counsel. And on we go with others. Handsome is as handsome does. Fair speech may hide a foul heart. I think one of his spies would, well, seem fairer and feel fouler. Oft evil will shall evil mar. The praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. At the table, small men may do the greater deeds. Where there's a whip, there's a will. Some of these have the "it is said" or "they say" concept hanging over them, and some may indeed be being made up on the spot. Yet none of them stick out for me so much as what Boromir and Aragorn say. Maybe it's the rhyme that hurts them, as most of these adages don't rhyme. Although Sam's "something hot out of the pot" sounds just fine to me. But it's actually the rhyming itself that eventually managed to move me into a not hating this moment frame of mind. Or maybe into a loving to hate this moment frame of mind, I don't know. Because later in the book, much later than the point of their worrying about the wargs, we are given a bit of rhyming that I think fits the way that Boromir and Aragorn were speaking their ersatz old sayings. It's in the Houses of Healing chapter, and it's spoken by the herb master of Minas Tirith, and he calls it one of the rhymes of old days, which women, such as our good Yareth, still repeat without understanding. When the black breath blows, and death's shadow grows, and all lights pass, come Athelas, life to the dying, in the king's hand lying. And when I read that, well, after a few times of reading that, I said, aha! There's a kind of matching going on here with what Boromir and Aragorn had said. in terms of the rhythm as well as the rhyming. Let's put them together. When the black breath blows and death's shadow grows, the wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. And all lights pass, Camathalas, Camathalas. But where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls. Life to the dying in the king's hand lying. It's not exact, but it's kind of close. The shortness, the sudden rhyming. And I thought to myself, hey, maybe this is how Gondor adages. Because Boromir, of course, is from Gondor. And Aragorn has spent a good bit of time in Gondor and, oh yeah, is working towards becoming the king of Gondor someday. So, it makes sense that if either of them are going to try and make up an adage on the spot, or just say something that is meant to sound like an adage, it would follow the beats or the patterns of what they know of as Gondorian adaging. Maybe there are other and possibly better adages within Gondor that don't follow these beats or patterns. But Boromir and Aragorn are utilizing this form to get their points across. And it would seem for good reasons. And I stand by the feeling that they are making them up on the spot. And maybe they don't have the poet's tongue to make them as sweet as the other adages that have been said, and will be said, but at least I can give them an A for effort. Not to mention the fact that they are making these up after nearly dying during their attempt to cross the Redhorn Pass, and while now under the threat of wargs and orcs coming down on them. I'd say that would tend to make anyone think and speak not quite as perfectly or poetically as one might in less dire and life-threatening situations. Either way, I have come to cut the two men some slack here, and I no longer hate the moment, which is why it is one of the little things that I love in The Lord of the Rings. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day.